Yeah, when you're married to your spouse, but when you're single, you're married to a community. I don't care who you are, I don't care how old you are, everybody has issues. When you're married, the primary context of working out your issues are in the context of your marriage with your spouse and your children. When you're not married, your issues get worked out in the context of community. And so your issues are just a lot more public and but not necessarily with the same level of commitment. Right.
Hello and welcome to New Kinship. This is David Frank, and I'm here with my co-host TJ Espinoza.
Hello, everyone.
And today we have the joy of getting to hear from Taka Chan, a friend of ours who lives in Hawaii, who we've met at Revoice. I think we've got to meet face to face. Yeah, I saw you at your panel. You did a great job. Anyways, and so we're just really delighted to have you. Thanks for coming and sharing a little bit of your Side B story with us.
I'll be here. Thanks for having me on.
Taka, could you just begin with a little bit of an introduction? You're in Hawaii right now, in the earlier part of your day. It's in the afternoon of our day. But where are you? Who are your people? What kind of work are you involved with?
Yeah. Well, aloha everybody. My name is Taka, like you mentioned. I was born and raised in a small town in Hawaii called Hilo. My grandpa was a cattle farmer. My people are originally from Hiroshima, Japan. We moved to the Hamakua coast of Hawaii Island in the late 1800s to work on the sugarcane plantations. And on my mom's side, I am Chinese, Cantonese specifically. And we first left China in 1870 to move to Hawaii and to the United States. So, born and raised on Kanaka Maoli land, and currently still living in Kanaka Maoli land, but currently in Honolulu. I work for a college campus ministry. I've been doing that for the last 18 years or so, working directly on college campuses with students and faculty, as well as doing some national work around resource development, even specifically on working with LGBTQ plus students and faculty.
And Taka, could you share just how you understand yourself now in terms of sexuality, and when did you come to that understanding?
Sure. So, I grew up Christian in evangelical spaces, Southern Baptist churches, and so I never would have described myself as gay or queer. It was always this thing of being gay is a sin. And so I was like, well, I love Jesus, and so I don't want to sin against Jesus. And so I always thought of it as struggling with same-sex attraction, if I even admitted to it. After years of prayer and discipleship and seeking the Lord, I feel comfortable using the words gay or queer to describe myself as an identity, as an orientation. Of course, my primary identity is in Christ, and first and foremost, a beloved child of God. And nothing comes before that. But
Amen.
I have found it to be helpful to use some identifiers in terms of identifying with a larger community, both the community of Christians as well as a larger community in terms of outreach and discipleship and building relationships with other folks.
And can you share, what did that look like? Did you have opportunity to share in your church spaces, or would you kind of know that wasn't welcoming space, to be honest? Have you had opportunities to talk with your family?
Mm-hmm. A lot of my discipleship around sexuality came more from the organization that I work with, the ministry that I work with. In the Southern Baptist churches I grew up in, I never really felt safe to be able to talk about sexuality with anyone. It was pretty much, the messaging was pretty much, don't be gay, period. And so I never really felt like I could initiate conversation. No one was really initiating conversation with me. There were people at church who were divorced or having extramarital affairs and such. But the only way that any kind of same-sex sexuality was talked about was always under the guise of condemnation and shame. So I never really felt that I could talk openly about that. Years ago, in the ministry that I work with, there were some folks who were talking about like, hey, there is a difference between orientation and attraction and identity on the one hand, and then sexual behavior on another hand. And those two don't have to go together. And that was actually really empowering and freeing for me. That it's like, oh, I don't need to be living in hiddenness and shame and fear and anxiety because of attractions that I have not chosen for myself. But I do get to choose my behavior. I do get to choose how I act on things. And that's been a real gift for me. Currently, I'm like totally out in staff spaces in the ministry that I work for. And it's a large organization of over 1,000 staff. At my church that I currently attend, I'm out to my pastor and several leaders of the church. The church that I grew up in, I'm not out to anyone there because I just don't know how it would be received. And I'm generally more cautious about who I come out to because of implications for fundraising. I do have to fundraise for the ministry, for my salary and ministry expenses, etc. And I know that the work that the Lord has called me to is important and significant. And I've told the Lord, if you've truly called me to this, you need to provide for it. And God has continued to provide for the ministry. And at the same time, like I want to walk in step with the Lord. That when I do choose to come out to people or communities, I want it to be because I feel invited by God, not because I feel like I'm forced to or that I'm trying to make a point. And what I found is that when I do that, things do turn out a lot better rather than in the times when I've tried to make a point.
Wow, thank you, Taka. Could you talk more about, during your college years, what was the conversation around sexuality and faith like in your context?
Yeah, so I was in college in the early 2000s. So this was very much still in the middle of the ex-gay movement. I think like being on a large secular college campus, elite private university, there was a lot of diversity of thought, not just in the general student body, but even among Christians as well. Like I was around Christians who supported gay marriage as a civil right. So they distinguished the difference between civil marriage and Christian or religious marriage. And I had just never considered that before. In the spaces I grew up in, it was always like, Christians were against civil gay marriage and didn't make a distinction from Christian marriage. And I started to appreciate understanding that distinction because I'm like, well, I want to be able to care for people. I want people to be able to like visit their partners like in the hospital or to be able to deal with like legal affairs. But also feeling like, the way that I saw God defining marriage in the Bible was between one man and one woman. I feel like there was a lot of healing work that the Lord did in me in terms of like my gender identity. Feeling that like, there's not just one model of what it means to be a man. I think masculinity in evangelical spaces is often defined by like bacon and burgers and barbecue and basketball, which are great things. Those are not bad things, like by any means. And I know there's a lot of women who enjoy those things. And I know there's a lot of men who don't enjoy those things. And that's okay. But to be able to find wholeness in my identity as a man of God was really significant. And I'm really grateful for that type of discipleship I got during college. And then also finding like a group of brothers that I could be honest and vulnerable with, to have accountability and prayer and to have fun together. And like I still really cherish those relationships close to 20 years after we graduated from college. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I was at the wedding of one of my best friends of college, and being able to be there to love and support him, and having stood as a groomsman or even a bridesman once for several of those friends that God blessed me with during college as well. And those are some of the people who have walked with me through this journey of sexuality and faith as I've come out to them many years after college, but being able to share about my journey and how I'm making sense of it. And then I think even for them, like different things being able to be pieced together more from while we were in the same physical space during college. I was just like, oh, so when you were talking about this, you were actually alluding to this. And being like, yeah, actually, it's actually really nice to be able to be more fully open and authentic and vulnerable for them to know more of the fullness of my story rather than feeling like I need to hide parts of myself.
I think in the past, you'd also mentioned to me that kind of ex-gay ministries being more awake or alive during your college years.
Yeah.
Did you ever intersect with those ministries in particular?
Kind of indirectly. Like, it's not like I ever like enrolled in one of those programs while I was in college. But I think the language and culture of it was still very much alive. There was once an auntie at church who handed me a pamphlet about one of the ex-gay ministries. Oh. And I don't know if it's because she suspected something about me or because she knew I was involved in young adult ministry. But she just handed the pamphlet to me. And, I read through it and I was actually kind of intrigued because that's what was available at the time. But yeah, like I said, I never actually participated in those ministries. There were like mentors, pastors, friends who were well versed in some of the practices of ex-gay ministries, things like mother wound, father wound, unpacking baggage, which I think is just like really great. Like in general, I think that's great for everyone, not just people with same-sex attraction, not just people with sexual baggage, but important for everyone's healing. But I think just without the promise of orientation change.
How did you have any, I guess, as you were part of that culture, did you find yourself either trying to pray the gay away, dating women?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, now you're in your 40s now?
I'm in my 40s now, yep.
Okay. Congrats. You've made it.
Thanks.
How do you reflect on that now? How do you try to approach your sexuality or dating going forward?
One, I try to be gentle with my younger self. I try to be compassionate with him because there's only so much that I knew. There were only so many resources that were available to me at that time. I also try not to blame the people who were influential in my life at that time because they didn't know either. I really wish there were better frameworks. I really wish there were better language, but that's just not how things were. I dated women. I tried to pray the gay way all the time, sometimes almost every single day. And it's like I never engaged in sexual activity with other guys or women. Like I've been celibate my whole life, but I think there was something about like, I want to feel quote unquote normal. And I always longed to be married and to have children. And that path was to marry a woman and to have kids. And in my mind, I thought that if I get married to a woman and have children, then I'll be normal. Then I won't, struggle with same-sex attraction anymore. From all of the queer folks that I know that are in marriages to people of the opposite sex, they say like, that actually doesn't resolve same-sex attraction. And there was one point that I almost got engaged to a woman, and at that time I wasn't honest with myself, and I wasn't honest with her. I wasn't even honest with God or with anyone else. And so I do see it now as an act of grace from God that we ended that relationship. And that was an extremely, extremely painful time because I wasn't able to articulate what was going on for me. And this is one of the ways that I say that I try to be gentle with myself and compassionate with my younger self because I didn't know. I think there was a couple of really intense conversations with a mentor at that time who just didn't understand things, was really upset with me. And then revisiting that conversation 10 years later, and I think she still didn't have the framework to have the compassion with my younger self that I was hoping for. But I asked her to consider. I was just like, hey, could you try to imagine how scary it would be for like a young Christian man who is gay but doesn't have anyone to talk with about that, and like just knows that being married to a woman is not the next right thing. And like I know that I hurt that woman. Unfortunately, like we're in a relationship again. We're not super tight or anything, but we're able to have conversations. I've even seen her step into ways of trying to be an advocate for LGBTQ people in Christian spaces, and I feel really grateful for that. And I kind of feel like, oh, if she, like somebody who was almost engaged, who is able to extend that kind of grace and even enter into advocacy now, I would really hope that other people would be able to do that too. And I am really grateful to that person. Now I'm not actively dating anyone of any gender. I'm not close to being in a mixed orientation marriage to a woman. I've been trying to figure out what does community and belonging look like for me, because I know that as a queer person who I feel God has invited me into celibacy outside of marriage, like I'm like, I need that. All of us need that, right? That's not just a queer thing, that's a human thing. And I've been trying to figure out things of like, oh, should I be like connected to like a family, husband, wife, and kids, and support friends in raising their kids? Should I like be a part of like some sort of covenant community other than that? And I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm in my 40s. I'm still trying to figure that out. There was a family that I was very, very, very close to, and I thought that they would be like a forever family type of thing, like so close to the kids, so close to husband and wife. And like that relationship ended close to 2 years ago. And I won't go into the details of that right now, but it's one of the most painful losses of my life. And especially because the relationship ended so abruptly. I still deeply, deeply grieve that loss. So I'm not sure. I don't know what God has for me looking for, but I do know God has good for me. Even just yesterday, I think I was reflecting, I was like, oh God, there are a lot of still really painful things in my life, but I see how you've blessed me with a lot of really good things as well. People at church, colleagues, some dear friends, even like the ones that I mentioned from college. But I'm still very much trying to figure things out. Very much trying to figure things out.
Last time we spoke, you mentioned just this kind of contrast of marriage to singleness. And when you're married to your spouse. When you're single, you feel married to everyone. But that you've actually cultivated a lot of rich friendships over these past 20 years. Could you share just what cultivating those relationships, deep friendships, what they're like, and how you continue to invest in them, or what it looked like to help initiate those?
Yeah. Well, our friend Bill Henson over at Posture Shift, who I love dearly, like he's walked with me through a lot of things, even helping me to come out to my parents and giving me some wisdom and how to do that. But I remember he was speaking at a training I was at several years ago, and he said every queer youth needs a comprehensive support system, a family, parents, siblings, aunties and uncles, pastors, therapists, spiritual directors, etc. And I was like, well, I'm not a youth, but it sounds like I need that comprehensive support system for myself. Mm-hmm. And so I started to try to be intentional about building that out. That story that you shared, David, about, when you're married to your spouse, but when you're single, you're married to a community. Like, that's actually something that one of my best friends told me like a few years ago. I was visiting his city and saw him and some other friends in that city, but I'd forgotten another one of my best friends was also in that city, because the last time I saw her, she was like home, like hours away. And I really hurt her, like in that process of not remembering to call her up to make plans to get together. And what my other friend said was like, he's like, oh yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, when you're married to your spouse, but when you're single, you're married to a community. So of course, there's going to be all these other people who I have close connections with, and at the same time, everybody has issues. I don't care who you are. I don't care how old you are. Everybody has issues. When you're married, the primary context of working out your issues are in the context of your marriage with your spouse and your children. When you're not married, your issues get worked out in the context of community. And so your issues are just a lot more public and but not necessarily with the same level of commitment. Right? In a marriage, you've made covenant vows to one another saying you're going to work through things. And a lot of times people decide that they don't want to do that anymore, that they're going to leave that covenant to the context of divorce. We don't have those same kinds of covenant vows when you're unmarried. Right? Of course, there are certain contexts like nuns, making covenant vows to an order or something like that, which I can really appreciate. But largely in the evangelical Protestant world, that doesn't exist. And I've been encouraged to see examples of that, especially in our community, popping up. And also looking back historically and into the Bible and over the last 2,000 years to see ways that people have made those vows to one another. But I think even the pain of losing that relationship with that family that I mentioned earlier was because my issues and her issues were being worked out in our friendship. But she could choose to just say it's over because it's easier to do that than to do that in a marriage. And I see some of the people that I've been closest with and how when things got really messy, as the closer you get, the messier things are going to be. That's just the way it is. The longer you're in friendship, you're going to have mess at some point. No matter how much you're trying to grow and work through things in therapy and in prayer and spiritual direction, there's going to be times when you hurt each other deeply, deeply, deeply. But I think for me as an unmarried person, it's okay, building relationships with some of these folks and then them choosing out has been so deeply painful because they can choose out of it. Whereas I feel I'm trying so hard to hold on to these relationships because I'm what else do I have? And of course, since the loss of some of these relationships, the Lord has shown me even if people walk away from you, I'm not going to walk away from you. And I'm going to provide other people for you as well. And so one of my best friends now is a Native Hawaiian woman, artist, activist. And she is also unmarried. She is in her 30s. She is gorgeous. She is a fierce supporter and activist. At the beginning of October, here in Hawaii, Pride Month is celebrated in October, but she sent me a text while I was traveling and said, hey, when you get back, I want to take you out for a meal to celebrate Pride Month. I went to the Pride Parade and Festival for the first time in my life this last weekend with her and some other friends. And I see ways that she has tried to engage with this part of my life in ways that, a lot of other friends who I have considered very close never did. So I am really grateful to see the people that the Lord has brought into my life that have been able to journey with me and not just draw lines and say, do this, don't do that.
Living in intentional community has been a really great experience where we don't have lifelong vows to one another, but we take really seriously our commitments and don't even, especially the longer you're here, of not moving in and out of the house in a kind of a willy-nilly fashion, but we made promises to each other and let's dialogue this together. Yeah. And it's, just been a contrast to the way I've experienced most church community life, where people have taken these vows to their church community, but then let their jobs make their decisions for them, let other life circumstances in a way that's oh, I guess that vow we made together didn't require us talking to each other when we decided to move out. And so we're in a culture that, makes it hard to find people who are, I guess, willing to think through commitment in more significant ways. But I'd love to here, I think you've shared about pastors who've really gone to bat for you before, because that's not always something that can be taken for granted. Can you
Yeah.
share about some of those joys?
Yeah. I am so grateful for the church that I attend right now. And, I started attending this church 8.5 years ago or so. And I remember having just moved to the island and looking for a church. And a friend was attending this church at the time, but, she and her husband are no longer at the church. They moved islands. We're actually from the same island originally. And so I visited the church and I was like, oh, I kind of like this. Not a huge church, maybe about 100 people, smaller now, post-pandemic. But just, I remember getting together with the pastor for coffee and saying like, hey, I am in ministry and this organization I work with is the primary space that I serve. I do want to serve through the church, but it's not going to look like being at a children's or youth ministry every week. Sometimes traveling for a month or two. Sometimes I'm like visiting other churches on the weekends or at conferences. And he was like, great. I want you to have a place where you can be rooted and sent out. And I was like, oh, I love that. And I've really seen that for other folks in the church as well. That actually like the church will come alongside me in my ministry and not just expect me to be a part of the church's ministries. I was previously at a much larger church where it's like they had great leadership structures, but it was a pipeline that if you didn't fit into that, they didn't know what to do with you. But, it's like, I mentioned I work for a college campus ministry. One of the professors I work with felt led to start up a weekly worship and prayer room open for students, other professors, community members. Two of my pastors have been to the prayer room several times this semester to support. We go and work at a community farm, a lo'ikalo, a taro farm, every month. And the church has started bringing people every month. Even when I was traveling, the church took a group when I wasn't there. And 5 years ago, during the pandemic, I was melting down about everything else. So it's just like, why don't I melt down about my sexuality too? Came out to my brothers and my sister-in-law. Came out to my pastor over FaceTime because we were on different islands. And I shared my story and he was just like, Taka, I wish I could have just recorded the last 10 minutes of your sharing and just play that for people because I want the church to be able to grow both in theological understanding, but also in our missiology and pastoring and how to be good friends to LGBTQ plus people. And I was just so pleasantly surprised by that. For the next few years, he was just like, yeah, I want you to share. I'm so open for you to sharing in front of the church. And even in different times, I'm like, I just really need to know what you believe. Where do you stand on things? And every time just being pleasantly surprised with how on board he is and how much he wants to love and support me and to love and support other people. I've had different friends from the Revoice conference come and visit and bring them to church. Like a few years ago, some of them came and they're more visibly queer than me in terms of attire and how they carry themselves. One of Pastor's sons was just like, hey, who are those guys? I go, they're some of Taka's friends. How does he know them? It's like, oh, through this conference, Revoice. What is that? Oh, this is what it's about. Does that mean that Taka is too? And then, that opened doors for me to have conversations with him too, and to share more of my story and my philosophy of ministry and how I'm trying to live my life, things I'm trying to live out and ways that I struggle and things are still really difficult in Christian spaces. But I do feel really grateful. My pastor is still wanting me to share more openly at church, and I just told him I'm not ready yet. Like I mentioned, implications for fundraising for my ministry. But also, we set up a time a couple of years ago for me to share my story with some of the leaders at church, where my pastor and I just kind of came up with a list of people to invite to his living room where I could share. And I wasn't focused on talking about theology. I do think theology is important, but that wasn't the focus. The focus was me sharing my story and me wanting to have people in the journey with me. And then there's an auntie like in her 70s who shared with me later on that her son is gay and has a partner, and trying to encourage her on how she best can love and walk with him. And then maybe about a month ago, even things at church and things being just really heightened politically, and just feeling this heavy burden in my heart to intercede for protection for vulnerable communities like the LGBTQ plus community and others. And then there's another leader at church who I haven't shared my story with that came up to me yesterday at church and said, it's like, I was really feeling that burden that you're feeling as well. They want to hear more about like how we can build bridges and love people across differences. And I'm like, oh, thank you, Jesus. That makes me so happy. And like, I do feel so thrilled that I can be a part of a church where, one, my story matters, and that like I can contribute in meaningful ways to trying to imagine being a church body that is not about divisiveness and drawing lines, but about being a space where people are welcome to come to explore and to experience the love and belonging of God and the people of God as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to the point that my pastors even said that if I were to share my story more broadly at church and this pushback, that he would resign. And I'm like, oh, that's a huge thing. That's a huge thing. Because sometimes straight people will say like, oh, I support you, but not really be willing to count any cost. And I sometimes say that like straight people declaring I support gay marriage is like men declaring I'm a feminist, or white people saying I'm not a racist, because they're just declarations that don't actually cost you anything. But to actually put your money where your mouth is and to live it out and to count some costs, like that's real advocacy.
When relationships fail, these close connections fail.
Yeah.
You mentioned that friendship that broke apart that you were close to, of that artist, activist woman. And I also ask this because I think these things fail more often as we get older.
Yeah.
And also your life has been a bit different than I think David Frank and my life, because David Frank has talked about his intentional community. And then I have covenant brothers, which is a type of covenantal relationship that's not marriage. And you are still kind of discerning kind of life. Yeah, but what's that like in your particular situation? What do you do when these connections fail if you don't have these other kind of bulwarks against maybe being very alone or struggling to feel connection or community?
I mean, that's a great question, and something I'm really trying to figure out. That friend I mentioned, like, I still love her deeply. And, it's like I think about, like, when my parents were married, they went through so many painful things. And, sadly, they are divorced now. But they went through so many things. And they still loved one another through all of that pain. So I still deeply love this friend. And I know that I hurt her as well. And I'd love an opportunity to try to, like, make things right and to try to listen, understand, and to share. And for her to understand. I don't know if I'll ever get that opportunity this side of heaven, because it's not just up to me, right? I don't know what will happen with that relationship. Like, it's still so deeply painful. And I think, for a long time I prayed every single day, Lord, redeem that. Make something good. And just recently I stopped, because I think there was a way that I've been holding on to it in a way that maybe is not healthy for me. I see all these different types of models that I see queer, same-sex attracted Christian people trying to live out faithfulness and belonging and intimacy through covenant communities, through different forms of kinship, of covenant brothers. And a lot of those sound really appealing to me. And I've asked the Lord and I've explored different things. I don't think it's been for lack of me trying. But I think something that's very often been the case for me in my life is I see things working for other people and I try them out, but God tells me, no, that is not specifically what I have for you.
Okay.
And so I don't know what it is. It'd be it feels like it'd be so convenient to figure that out, but I don't
Mm.
know what that is. And honestly, like, I wouldn't be surprised if God just told me, like, yeah, I'm not going to have any of those specific things for you.
Mm.
Not a mixed orientation marriage, not a celibate partnership, not either of the things that you folks have done. And I do wonder, and this is live right now, this conversation right now,
Okay.
live, of like, of if it is that, like, just like, oh yeah, Taka, you're going to be married to a community. Whoever is in your community, like, that's who you're married to.
Mm-hmm.
And just the managing of all of those different relationships, both with the blessings and challenges of all of those things. Having some folks that are more inner circle, some folks that are further. And I'm like, oh, maybe that's like what Jesus did too, right?
Sure.
Like Jesus had like the 72, Jesus had the 12, Jesus had the 3. And then John calls himself the disciple that Jesus loved. And so yeah, I'm not sure what things will look like for me for the rest of my life or even for the rest of this year, but what I am trying to believe, because I know that it is true, is that Jesus has good for me, that Jesus has people for me, Jesus has belonging for me, and that I want to try to be faithful and not just try to make things easier. Because I think rarely the call of a disciple of Christ is easy. I think even in my own birth family, like, my parents were both previously married, on, and yeah, it was a rough upbringing. And then, they separated several times while I was growing up, and even as an adult. Then a few years ago, they separated, divorced, and that's been something that's really difficult for me as well. And I think even as I look at my own life and discipleship decisions that I'm trying to make about not pursuing a same-sex marriage, but then wondering, it's like, okay, what does discipleship look like for people who have been twice divorced? When wanting
Yeah.
to love and walk with people, then have people experience the grace, the abundant grace of the Lord, and at the same
Mm.
time feeling like, oh, is it only for people who are called to submit our sexualities to God
Mm.
and to let go of things that feel like where we might want to find our belonging? And
Mm.
yeah, it's difficult. It's really painful to see even Christians not call other Christians to like the same standards that queer people are called to.
Mm.
Mhm. Yeah, I really appreciate you highlighting that because with so much kind of theological controversy being focused around, oh, side A or side B,
Mhm.
it's so easy to internalize our experiences of loneliness or rejection,
Yeah.
not feeling like, yeah, when people feel like life is not working out the way we wanted it to,
Yeah.
for us to thrust it kind of upon just that question of like, oh, well, if I just, maybe life is, greener on the other side of the fence.
Yeah.
And it's helpful to remember that there's other people whose situations have wound up in other tough patches and have some similar callings to submit.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Like I don't want to shame people or cut off relationship when they're divorced and remarried. But at the same time, it's like, oh, I see straight men who have been divorced multiple times, maybe on third marriage, and still serving in ministry leadership. And I don't know the situations and all of those. I'm not thinking of anyone specific because I know of multiple situations like this. And also recognizing like, oh, but I can very easily see in situations where if I even just say that I'm gay, even though I'm celibate, not in some sex marriage, that I could lose funding, that I could be like removed from a number of different ministries because I've seen that happen to a lot of different friends. And yeah, how do you? It just feels difficult that there are different standards for straight people and for queer people. I do think that there is something about queer side B people being able to call straight people up to higher standards.
Yeah, agreed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what I've really appreciated about my side B journey is my own experience as a side B person has caused me to confront like some difficulty or barrier, realizing that this is like, oh, this is an idol in our culture that is hurting a lot of people, or a way of a way that our kinship networks are deconstructed and everybody's lonelier than they should be.
Yeah.
And it's the things that have been highlighted for me give me a somewhat, a lens to see the way that we're all kind of suffering.
Sure.
So it's both a like prophetic of calling people to raise their standards, but also prophetic of we need to build new culture and new systems for all of us, and including the marginalized, but for all of us too.
Absolutely.
Okay, could you talk more about your journey into formal discipleship ministry? What was that like for you as a queer person?
Discipleship ministry just meaning like the ministry that I've been working for?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wasn't out to myself when I started working for a current organization I worked for in 2007. So it's not something I really thought about too much. I would say it's been significant just in my journal in general. I would say like there was a painful process in 2015 and 16 when the organization I worked for was clarifying its position around a theology with marriage and sex. A traditional historic Christian belief that sex is reserved for the context of marriage between one man and one woman. And employees were asked to engage with that for 18 months and then to decide if they could believe and caused a lot of people to leave the organization. That left me in a place of feeling really lost and visible and confused. As I heard people talk about like what they mean when they say queer and saying just like, well, actually sex, like sexual activity doesn't have to be a part of what it means to be queer. That there is actually a difference between, on the one hand, identity and attraction and orientation and with sexual behavior on the other hand, but those two don't necessarily come together. And that was actually really freeing to be like, oh, I don't choose who I'm attracted to, but I do get to choose how I respond, how I act on those things or not. And so it was actually in that time that like I just felt like I said, so invisible and voiceless that I felt like I came out to one of my first friends and I really appreciated the way that he was able to hold nuance of holding my story as well as stories of other people who were saying different things. Yeah, and just feeling really grateful, like, oh, knowing he wasn't using other people's stories to try to delegitimize my own. Because that sometimes happens, and that's really painful. And that sometimes still happens, and it's still really painful when that does happen. And similarly, like, I don't want anyone to use my story to delegitimize anyone else's. But yeah, it was an important thing for me to come out to a friend who at the time was working for this organization, and then to start coming out to some other people as well in my organization. Every step felt scary. And I think talking with a mentor in that season, I asked him, it's just like, yeah, how do I know whether I should come out to someone, or how do I know how to identify? And I remember he said to me, that's not up to anyone except you and Jesus. You and Jesus decide that together. And so I started praying and asking the Lord, like, who do I come out to? How do I come out to them?
And yeah, seeing that the Lord walking with me through all of those different decisions. I think one of my big fears was that I think, especially if I came out to straight guys, straight Christian brothers, that I'd lose those relationships because those relationships were so significant and meaningful to me. And the Lord used them to bring so much healing for me. I was just scared to lose those relationships. And honestly, now I still feel scared to share with, I think, especially some of my Christian brothers that I'm not yet out to, because I don't want to lose those relationships. I think there's a worry that if I come out to some of them, but one, they're gonna tell me like you're living in sin. But I think even beyond that, even just like, oh, they might not want to room with me at conferences or together or something like that, or they might view me as suspicious, like I'm gonna be like all of a sudden become a predator toward them or their children or something. I don't know. I'm still the same me. Like I wasn't a predator before, and I'm not a predator now.
Hmm. I've even heard there's a specific OCD related to, I think they call it pedophilic OCD, where it's people who don't have any pedophilic tendencies, but the anxiety that they could have that thought, or that people might think that they might have that thought or
Yeah,
intention,
yeah,
just becomes very consuming. And I was like, oh, I don't, have any diagnosed OCD, but I can get how that fear and that concern amplified up in some people's minds could just really wreck you, because I think most of those gay guys have experienced some of that at some point, of just, oh, how awful of a person might they think that I am if I open up a little bit.
yeah, absolutely. It's even, or it might even be better for someone who has been in prison for like violent crime to be with children than a gay person that has no criminal history. That's just the mindset of some people. And I tried to express this to a friend that like, yeah, this is the reality of just homophobia in society, is that it's not just an individualized thing. It's not just somebody, slinging around gay slurs, but it's also about the reality that like I walk around just like uber cautious of how I'm going to be perceived, like around children. I'm not going to get into how she responded to that, but it was extreme.
I'd be curious if you could talk more about how your organization has navigated faith and sexuality since that particular time when they clarified, and
Sure.
kind of the tumult happened, people left.
Yeah, you
Both,
said
I
that.
assume, well, I
Cool.
would say, I assume both more conservative and more progressive people left. I assume it was
Yeah.
multiple types of
Hmm.
people.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely there have been folks on both ends of the spectrum who have left the organization. I would say for the organization that I work for, more folks on the more progressive side. And yeah, how has the organization navigated that? I think a way that the organization was pushed in a really good direction was to say, like, okay, if we're saying that we actually love LGBTQ plus people, how is the organization actively doing that? Not just in word and not just on paper, but actually doing that. And like I'm grateful that I've been a part of a team for several years that is training with staff for the organization around working with LGBTQ plus students and faculty on predominantly secular campuses, while the organization holds a traditional theology around marriage and sex. It's complex, but our various ministries also have participants from across the theological spectrum, or probably more often than not, that don't actually have strong theological understanding of anything. And so, one, how do we walk with people in a meaningful way? Not just say, believe this, don't believe that, but to actually help people understand things holistically through the arc of scripture. And then also, like, what does whole life discipleship around sexuality look like for all people? not just queer people, but for straight folks. What does it look like to walk with people in discipleship when we are sinned against and not just with our own sin? You know, for survivors of sexual assault, there's something about not just telling them like, well, what did you do for that to happen, or how have you sinned in response to that, but for the healing work that God wants to do in that person's life. And I think there's also something, you know, for a lot of queer people who have felt sinned against by Christians as well, to be able to recognize that we have a kind and loving God that does not reject us like Christians have. Uh, and I think that is all a part of discipleship as well. So my desire is that all of the staff in the organization I work for would be able to articulate that and live out that model of ministry as well. Uh, and there's a great resource that I helped to develop that's free and publicly available to everyone too. I won't mention it specifically right now because then that'll let people know what organization to work for, but maybe I can share it with both of you sometimes, that you can mention it on the podcast sometime, some other time. I
Yeah,
would
sure.
also say that I feel really grateful that I'm able to contribute in a meaningful way to the thriving of both queer and same-sex attracted staff in the organization, as well as our ministry on our campuses too.
I remember being asked to share some of my story on a panel.
Mhm.
You know, it's just like, oh, you know, was it like for me as a queer, same-sex attracted person working for the ministry and just in life, in the church, in society? And I remember saying to my supervisor, like, hey, I'm willing to share some of my story, but I never want to become the organization's queer ministry resources guy. And yeah, TJ, you're laughing because you know that that is very much what I've stepped into over the last 5 years, 5+ years really, in becoming one of the ministry's queer resources guy. And that actually gives me so much joy because I know that there are folks who have gone before me who have fought battles so that I can be where I am now. And that right now that I am fighting battles and creating resources and seeking God to change the spiritual landscape so that younger folks, the next generation, can experience something better than what is happening even now.
Yeah. And yeah, thank you. I'm glad you're doing that work, because it can't be underestimated how much to just come to a alignment on a theology and what biblical interpretation, that can go relatively quick, but to shape a culture and is a whole nother work.
Have you, in your campus work, ever been like approached? Like, isn't your organization homophobic?
Oh yeah.
This and that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you say in those
I
moments?
know. What do you say in those moments, right? I get asked this question a lot.
What do you say, especially
Yeah.
you? Yes.
You know what I tell people is like, well, if we're just trying to say is something homophobic or not, we're actually asking the wrong question. I think a better question to ask is like, what are we doing to be anti-homophobic? What are we doing to actively, proactively, sacrificially love LGBTQ plus people? To me, that like, you know, it's like, I think we're all kind of around the same age, but like in the 90s, early 2000s, the catchphrase was tolerance. How do you tolerate people? But like, God doesn't call us to tolerate people. God calls us to love people. God calls us to lay down our lives for people. Jesus calls us his friends. He even called Judas his friend, you know, who betrayed him. He even called Peter his friend, who deserted him. And I think that is something that I want to do, and that I call staff at our organization to do as well. It's like, what does it mean to radically and sacrificially love LGBTQ plus people on our secular campuses? You know, so many Christians care about the topic of human trafficking. You know, it's like you see it for a lot of different churches, a lot of different ministries, and they say like, you know, LGBTQ plus people are trafficked at far higher rates than straight and cis folks. You know, like, a lot of youth that are trafficked because they're living on the streets, because their Christian parents disown them. And so if we're going to talk about human trafficking, let's not avoid talking about LGBTQ plus people and how can we reduce harm against LGBTQ plus people, especially LGBTQ plus youth. Um, if we, there's so many things that Christians can do regardless of theology. We can care about mental health and suicidal ideation and depression. Like those are things that Jesus cares about deeply. We can say bullying of queer kids is bad, period. Nobody needs to add a but to that ever. Like, I would love to see more churches show up for those rallies against bullying. Because I feel like Jesus would do that. Jesus saw that when religious leaders dragged the woman caught in adultery, to him to like pass judgment, that Jesus didn't pass judgment. He also didn't say to her, what you're doing is fine. But Jesus prevented anyone from casting the first stone because no one was without sin except for himself. And Jesus didn't cast the first stone.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Could you also give us, like, pull back the curtain a bit on this organizational group for queer SSA people? Like, what's that? What do you guys do? Yeah, what's that like? And then also, what are some of the issues some of the members have faced that might be different than some of your issues that you faced?
Yeah.
Even if you're in a similar position.
Yeah, great question. I'm not sure how openly I can talk about this, but I'll share some things and maybe you can edit it out later if I can
Okay.
if I can't
Yeah,
talk
no
about
worries.
these things. So yeah, I'm grateful to have been serving for the last 4 years as a part of an employee resource group for queer and same-sex attracted staff of the organization I work for. And it's a staff-facing group to try to support queer and same-sex attracted staff to be able to improve outcomes. And so 3 years ago, we did a survey of dozens of staff in the organization who identify as queer or same-sex attracted. And kind of like based on those survey findings, we developed some projects to address those needs. So in terms of felt needs, like the number one thing that folks said that they wanted was spiritual formation resources. Like as queer campus ministers. And I just thought that was so beautiful. Just like they could have articulated like any number of things that they wanted, but they basically said like, help us know how to follow Jesus better as queer people. And so it's like, we worked with our spiritual formation department to develop prayer retreat guides, and we're wanting to develop like a Bible study series. And then they said they just want time with other people other queer, same-sex attracted staff of the organization. And so we started hosting quarterly Zoom calls. Sometimes it's a prayer call, just how can we pray for each other? Sometimes it's around a discussion topic. Sometimes it's just to celebrate one another, like to play some games. Because we need to be able to have joy, because sometimes it can feel so heavy at the intersection of queerness and faith. But we need to be able to celebrate and laugh and have fun together. And so one of the other things that they said was like they want to know how they can do better ministry on campus to reach LGBTQ plus folks on college campuses. And so we started doing a webinar series, just not necessarily doing best practices, because I don't think anybody knows best practices, but like, hey, who are some people who have been doing some good work and who have seen some good fruit, and to share about what they're doing. And that's just been a really beautiful thing to see as well. I see that folks have just become a little bit more confident over the last few years, still having a sense of humility and really wanting to do better, but not being frozen in fear anymore about moving in one direction or another, but feeling freer to actually try things, to love people individually, but also like trying to love the campus as a whole as well. I have a story of a guy who was in a training that I was leading a few years ago. Who I shared a story about a failure that I had about like, somebody coming out to me when I was in college, and I was nice, but I never really followed up with him. But then almost 20 years later, going back to him and apologizing for never following up or pressing him deeper or walking with him in a more meaningful way. But this colleague of mine, heard that story and went back to a student that had come out to him previously. And he apologized to that student and said, like, yeah, I want to be a better friend. It's like my wife and I want to try to extend family to you as well, to like welcome you over for different holiday celebrations or things like that. And that student was just so moved and felt and expressed that they had never been extended that type of invitation before.
Wow, it's amazing.
Yeah. It's,
I I also want to be sure to draw this line out, this thread. Could you talk more about how, more explicitly, I suppose, about how your particular experience from your positionality as Japanese and Chinese as a queer person compares to some of the other like European American or white people you've been around?
sure.
And I only ask because obviously you touched on this, but I wonder if we can draw it out a little bit more clearly.
Yeah. Yeah. Happy to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Intersectionality is totally a thing, right? Like, I don't get to separate out when I'm Asian
Yes.
and when I'm queer. I don't get to separate out like my heritage and growing up in Hawaii and everything in this place that has shaped me from any other part of my life. It is all of me all at the same time. And sometimes I feel more a part of myself in certain environments. Like if I'm in a predominantly white environment, I'm going to feel more of like my ethnic racial background. But if I'm in a predominantly straight space, especially if there's something problematic that's being said, I'm going to feel more of my identity as a sexual minority. I'll say, one of the examples that I give is just the idea of individualism versus like collective mentality. I think as a Japanese and Chinese person, like there's much more of a sense of a collective mindset that I am not just myself, but I'm a reflection of my family and my community and my people. So something like a National Coming Out Day, I think can be a really great, wonderful thing. Saying like, hey, we're gonna do this together. But it can also feel really individualistic because sometimes it can be without regard to other meaningful people in your life that coming out publicly on social media will have an effect on as well. I also think there's some
Yeah.
like really beautiful things that my ethnic cultural heritage can bring into predominantly white queer spaces. I think there's a sense of like understanding what it's like being on the outside and being marginalized for both ethnic minorities and for queer folks. Um, it's like I bring my Asianness into queer spaces. I bring my queerness into Asian spaces. I bring my maleness into both of those spaces. So even in spaces for queer people of color, like I bring my privilege like as a man and need to navigate that as well with with both caution and joy. And so like yeah, I think I've seen some beautiful things that the Lord has done, even specifically in queer Asian spaces. I know that you've had Stephen on this podcast before, and he's a near and dear friend. Him talking about the Bejans. And then also like I've had a longing to help other queer people of color connect with one another as well. Like I have a number of really close queer Latino friends, and I want them to be able to gather together and find a sense of community and belonging as well. I think because I've experienced how beneficial it is to have queer Asian friends.
Yeah, you've mentioned before in a different conversation that even though I think you've experienced kind of blatant harassment based off of both your queerness
Blatant
and your
harassment.
ethnicity,
Okay.
even though pe-
Oh,
people would be like, oh, but you're pretty straight passing, or
oh
maybe
gosh,
you're
yeah.
ethnically ambiguous.
Yeah, no, it's
Can you
interesting.
share at all about how and how it's difficult to, or I don't know, those things just don't end up being so simple?
Yeah. No, yeah, this term straight passing, I just don't like because it doesn't actually protect me from homophobia in society. And so, like, yeah, even here in Hawaii, I've been at a beautiful botanical garden doing a prayer walk and being harassed and called racist and homophobic things. Walking to the farmer's market, I've been followed and yelled at and sworn at and called racist and homophobic things. And so, like, there's so many beautiful things about the cultures here in Hawaii, but there's also a lot of homophobia. And I have different friends who say, like, well, traditionally in Hawaiian culture, like, mahu, or there's no good translation for mahu. It's not queer, it's not trans, it's those things and also not those things, it's beyond those things. And also for me, not being Native Hawaiian, I don't want to define a term that is not mine to define. But having Native Hawaiian friends and traditionally Mahu were so cherished in society. I'm like, well, that's great. That's beautiful. Can you tell that to your homophobic uncles and nephews and brothers? Because talking about tradition isn't actually keeping me safer. And that's really hard. And it's like the way that I look, it's very clear in Hawaii that I'm from here. Um, but like there's racism is alive and well everywhere you go. Asian folks, Japanese and Chinese folks specifically in Hawaii do carry a lot of privilege economically, politically, but those things don't protect me from racist attacks. And also, like, it's like I think some of my own feelings about choosing to identify as gay or as queer is that, like, I do know that there are spaces where I might not be attacked because of the way that people perceive me. But I do have queer and trans friends that may be more likely to be attacked, and that's not their fault. And I want to be able to stand in solidarity with them and to be able to care for them as well. And yeah, I
Mhm.
we need to also be more proactive about not just grieving when people are attacked or when people are killed, but to try to be a community, a whole community that cares and prevents harm.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's been some of my own main, my initial instigation to identify with my queer experience in a more public way was to be in solidarity with those who could not hide it and could not run from its effects as
Yeah,
easily as I might be able to.
yeah,
Taka, I'm also curious. We've been asking people in the past season when we talk with them about being side B, a side B life. So why are you not side A? And I ask that because that is
yeah,
oftentimes the the other live option
yeah,
that people could pursue. Yeah, so yeah, what does that mean to you? Why have you
sure,
not chosen to walk that path, but walk this other path?
sure. Wow, it's a really great question. I have people near and dear to me in my life who are in same-sex marriages, and I love them so much, and Jesus loves them too, and I want to be committed to them as I am committed to any sent person life in my life. And so I'll see why I choose to be side B. Um, like I mentioned, I grew up in Southern Baptist churches, and those were very side X spaces. And that was a mindset that I had. I tried to privilege it away for a long time. I think I've not I think I have done a lot of theological research. I've done a lot of reading, I've watched videos, and I've had people who I've been able to talk with and I respect and I trust their thoughts. And there's one book in particular that I really like. It's called Two Views: Homosexuality, the Bible, and the Church. Something like that. Something, if that's not the exact name, it's something like that. And I just really appreciated it. There are two side A scholars and two side B scholars who articulate things. And when I was reading it and discussing it with some colleagues, I something that I wasn't okay with was just the way that the Side A scholars approached the Bible. And it was approaching the Bible either in a way where you just kind of toss things out or you say it's irrelevant. And I'm like, I personally am not okay with that approach to reading the Bible. I think there's different ways of deconstructing certain passages to say like, well, in historical context, it means this, not this. And I think we can go around those issues forever saying like, no, it means this, no, it means this, it doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean that. But then actually looking at the arc of all of scripture, from Genesis through the Old Testament, through the Gospels and the early church, through Revelation and the new church, and what does the arc of scripture actually say about marriage and sex? And Jesus even says that like there will be no marriage like in the creation, right? So there's a promise for us that there's going to be something even better than marriage and the creation, and that's something that I hold on to. And honestly, like I can say this now because of high regard for scripture and how we approach scriptural interpretation, because I've had decades of experience of valuing scripture, of trying to read scripture with integrity, and also making discipleship decisions with the quote unquote little things. There's no way that I would be able to make, you know, such a radical and sacrificial decision to be side B and to be celibate if I didn't have people who walked with me to help me to make decisions around things that feel a lot smaller. If you're faithful with the little things, you know, you can be faithful with bigger things. And I also know that I need community with me now, both queer and straight people that can walk with me to try to figure it out.
I also want to ask, it's interesting always to me that in kind of the side B movement that's emerged in the past few years, you and a little bit me, I'm a bit younger than you, but a little bit me, we occupy some of the elders
Yeah.
in the movement. There are older people than us,
Yeah.
but you and I are still in the higher,
Sure.
higher age range.
Yeah.
So yeah, what has that been like for you to, at a young age, being kind of in this sort of, in the age hierarchy of the movement, being an
Sure.
elder? What has that been like for you?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've been working with college students for the last 18 years, and so I'm familiar with working with folks. But I think there's honor and a privilege and a responsibility that's there in longing for something better for the next generation. I think knowing some of the problems that we have faced when we were growing up and we were in high school and coming into adulthood and wanting something better for this generation and future generations. And yeah, remembering the challenges that we face and wanting to walk with the next generation in a better way too. Also say something about generations older than us. You know, like I think it's true, TJ, like a lot of leaders in the movement right now are in their late 30s and 40s. I think there's something really to be said for those who are in their 60s and 70s and older. When I think about folks who, you know, survived the AIDS epidemic, you know, who saw their friends dying. I think about folks who survived ex-gay ministers and, you know, like went through a lot of trauma, like in those spaces. And I just feel a lot of gratitude for the folks who went before us. You know, it's like they didn't get to experience things that we're experiencing now, or that we're all experiencing things at the same time, just in different life stages. Like, I'm so grateful that because we have things like Free Voice and a lot of other ministries, that 18 to 22-year-olds get to have like a world that was so radically different from what I got to experience at the time. But then I think about people who are coming out in their 60s and 70s now and like experiencing second adolescence in their 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
Like, I know it's awkward for me and in my 30s and now in my 40s. But to any listeners of this podcast who are older than me, especially if you're in your 60s and 70s, I just want to say thank you to them because their faithfulness has paved the way for people like us to be able to press into things and think into things and to innovate and create and to articulate in ways that they never were able to in decades before. So thank you, friends, to all of you who are listening. Thank you. Like without you, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing.
Amen. A final question for me. How do you perceive what the future will be for you at this point in the side as a side B person? Looking ahead.
For me
What do you
personally,
see? Yes.
I don't know. That's a great question. People kind of keep on asking me, it's just like, well, what do you see as your ideal job? I'm like, I don't know. What do you see? Like, what do you think community looks like for you 5, 10 years from now? I'm like, I don't know. I'm just trying to survive every single day, to be honest. In my sabbatical in the fall, I visited a number of different friends who are part of different communities. One is kind of part of like a village where everybody lives in separate units, but they come and work together as a community for different projects in the complex. Others are living like with best friends, committed friends that they will continue to be that way even when they're married. If they get married, at least one of them is getting married very soon. I see folks who are part of like an apartment complex of living together. I see folks who are part of like, you know, such committed living spaces that they put all of their paycheck into one bank account and they spend money out of that together. Um, and so like I don't know what specifically the Lord has for me, but I do want to trust God to provide good, supportive community for me. I am grateful for friendships and relationships that I have right now. And I do wonder, it's like, is something more specific and more intentional in the future? And I'm just not sure.
I'm praying for you, Taka.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And if you ever want to brainstorm on community household structures
Yeah.
or ways to build this just practical local partnerships, would love to offer anything I'm able to. We just need people who can take those creative steps of initiation and invitation, and beautiful things will happen.
Yeah. Maybe pray for like $5 million and a 5-acre plot of land in Hawaii.
We
where,
all
like,
want that.
I
We
can
all want that.
build something like that.
Yeah.
Having like a cul-de-sac of like 5 houses or something would be amazing.
We all want to start the cult commune.
Yeah. Separate living spaces, but connection. And yeah.
Well, thanks so much.
Thanks for
Taka,
having me
is
on.
there anything else that you want to share with our listeners before we head out?
Well, yeah, I just want to say that I really appreciate this podcast and other podcasts like this. Like, I know that you've had folks on from Life on Site B as well. And I would say that it's podcasts like this that has helped me to feel connection, has helped me to sort through different questions or conversations from my own life and for the ministry that I'm involved with as well. And it's even created a sense of connection and belonging from even across thousands of miles. So thanks so much. I'm really, really grateful.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks, folks who joined for listening on this episode. If you do want to connect, while I don't know what app you might be listening to this on, but we are actually hosted this on Substack, and there's comment features on the episodes, which might be a fun way to see what other listeners are thinking. And the most fun way to connect is to just join us at Revoice. We've had a pretty steady presence, and that's a blast.
Great.
Okay. Well, yep. Bye, everybody.
Bye. If you like this podcast and want to see it continue, we have news. We are transitioning to Substack's paid subscription model. We will still keep our Patreon for existing members, but we're switching over to a simpler model for perks and payments on the Substack platform.
Starting at $5 a month, you can ensure that this podcast continues. And you'll also get access to our subscriber-only WhatsApp group for new Kinship supporters. This podcast is fully supported by people like you who want to see it continue. And on that note, if you like the new Kinship podcast, one of the best ways you can support it is by sharing it with someone else who might like it. The more the merrier.